Well, hello, Glory City West leadership team. So disappointed that I couldn't be with you tonight, but as you can see, I'm just about to be flying off to England. We have quite a packed itinerary over there, and actually received quite a few words from the Lord that the area that we're going into, Basingstoke, is that the Lord is really starting to do some significant things over there. And you know, with some of the churches actually in a region that is very close to there, they have just seen thousands of people. I think one church in particular has seen like 2,000 people that have given their hearts to the Lord. And so I believe that the harvest is so ready and the harvest is so ripe, and I believe we're going to start to see that kind of thing in Ipswich. And one of the things I'm going to share as well is about preparing for the harvest and really praying into that. So if you could be praying for me and for Candace and for Eliana for this trip, just really believe that it's going to be significant. And obviously Abby and Rod and Fred and Christine are going to be with you. And so it's going to be a great 3 weeks coming up. So just wanted to talk just shortly about culture. And I believe that, you know, in Glory City West and really the culture that Pastor Fred and Christine have been pioneering along with Grant and many of the team that will be here tonight, that there's been it's a supernatural culture. It's a culture of love. It's a culture of evangelism. It's a culture of reaching out to the community. These are our cultural aspects that I just think are so powerful. And and I look at the culture in Brisbane and how there's been this beautiful merger of the two cultures and the attributes, basically taking the best of both worlds to kind of have a hybrid super culture. And so that's the thing about family, is it's, you know, we share a DNA, a common DNA. But the culture, I believe that the Lord is taking us into the next stage of intentionality when it comes to culture. And I think that we'll see, you know, in the next couple of years that there's going to be a continual transition for the the culture that the Lord is establishing, not only in just Glory City West, but at Glory City Brisbane and the network as a whole. But a couple of things just to share about culture. I've heard this quote that says, "Culture eats strategy for lunch." When you're learning a new culture, let's say, for instance, when I went to China when I was 5.5 years old, as a young kid, it's quite easy to assimilate into a culture. But if you're coming from a different cultural background, oftentimes there's an intentionality. Sometimes a new culture can be uncomfortable to begin to transition into. Let's say if you're starting to learn a new language, starting to understand how different things are working. So when you're in the initial stages, intentionality is important. But when intentionality actually becomes culture, it's an incredibly natural thing. And one of the things I had written there, the ease of assimilation into a culture has two factors. So when people are joining the church, there's two major factors that I can see when it comes to culture, and that is the potency that the individuals carry of that culture, and also the percentage of how the congregation is carrying that. Now let me explain that. Let's say if in pretty much every church that I've been to, there's always a handful of people that are passionate for Jesus. And I've even seen where there's a church culture where people are just, they haven't been too passionate about Jesus. But if you add one person that is carrying, let me call it this way, the temperature that they're carrying of their passion for Jesus actually can affect an entire room full of people. I think my cousin was a great illustration. He was at another church, and just because of him, he wasn't even in leadership or anything like that, but the way that he worshiped and the way that he was passionate about Jesus and he would be sharing with other people, it actually changed the temperature. So in one case, the culture that we are carrying as leaders, and the love culture, the evangelism culture, the discipleship culture, if we can continue to not just be at the level, it's easy to remain in the culture that is normal for us, but to be able to take it to the next level of intentionality and saying we are really going to just put our lives on display and train others how to imitate the culture that we really want to model. And so the other thing is the percentage of people that's involved in the potency. So when you have one person that's fully passionate for Jesus, it can shift a culture, but it will be challenging and it will take a longer period of time. But the more people that are modeling the culture that we're wanting to step into, the easier that it is. And I just want to give an illustration with regards to worship. And one of the things that we talk about quite often, and I don't know if people realize the power of even having people come up the front to worship and how significant that is. When I first started Outbreak, so Uncharted, which we were in the last week, it was amazing just to see the breakthrough in people's lives. When we started Outbreak in the beginning, it was an interculture youth ministry, and probably the majority of youth ministries that were there were it was a handful of kids from here, a handful of kids from there, and they weren't used to full-on passionate worship. But I invited one youth ministry, Culture Shifters, who had, that's the name of their youth ministry, who had really pioneered a culture of passionate worshipers. And so not only did we have passionate worshipers on the stage, but we had passionate worshipers in the congregation, and they would go straight to the front and they would be entering in and they would be giving absolutely all that they could in worship. And you know what the amazing thing was? Within 4 Outbreak meetings, the Culture Shifters guys had a 21st birthday. But the other youth ministries had been swept into the culture where worship, passionate worship up the front, and dancing and lifting their hands and crying out to the Lord was such a natural thing that they'd established it because of the dominant culture in there, and they were swept into this. So I really want to encourage you, just, one of the things in terms of worship, why being up front is so key, and why is being passionate. It's easy to say, well, each individual has their own expression of worship, which is so true. But what I actually think is more powerful even than a passionate worship team that is up at the front is a culture of people, because there's this mentality that obviously the worship leaders, they need to be passionate because they're on stage, and so there can be a distance between that. But if you have people, the more people that are super passionate in worship, the easier people are going to begin to come into that slipstream, and we're seeing that. And I just want to encourage you just to even take that intentionality to the next level, to not just see us as leaders, as participants, unless we're on stage. But I would even challenge that mentality that I think is quite common in the church, that those that are those that are on the platform probably have less influence than those that are actually up in the front. And that's what I love, about Pastor Fred and Christine and Abby. Like, they're just and Rod and Vanessa, the whole team are passionate worshipers, and it actually says more to the congregation about our culture than what is actually happening on stage. An illustration of this is, I remember one of the Outbreak camps that we had most of our normal Outbreakers away, but we had a bunch of new youth ministries that weren't used to it, and we were going hard on the stage, just worshiping and trying to press through, but it was really, really challenging. We had one girl that was, her name was Stephanie Dwyer, and she was on stage and she was singing with us, and she was just as passionate as she's always been, but she noticed the opportunity to be able to shift the culture. So she actually put down her microphone, went up the front, and just went exuberant in worship, and I tell you what, she was more effective in that moment off the stage than when she was on the stage. So I would really encourage you. The other thing is its proximity, that when you're closer in proximity to one another, it seems like that there's this hot coals type deal where you're rubbing shoulders with people almost. You know, you don't have to be actually physically touching shoulders, but when you're in the front and you're swept up in worship, there's a corporate release. The other thing that it does is it breaks the consumer mentality or the observer mentality. When people are behind the seats, there can be kind of an observer thing. You got the people up front, and then you got people that are observing. But when people come up the front, there's almost more of an expectation that that they're actually involved in worship leaders. So we are all worship leaders in up the front. So I'm really, really excited. I believe that God is going to start taking us into a season where the